Hey there, I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website techinterview.guide, and I'm here to help people with career advancement and interview preparation. My live stream on Twitch covers topics such as company research, how to build resumes and cover letters, applying for the job, getting through interviews, and what to do during negotiations. I've coached thousands and thousands of people over the years to get jobs at the biggest tech companies in the industry, and I'm here to help you too. The following episode is taken from a longer live stream event and may contain interactions with other people in chat. Check out the end of the episode for more information. Let's get to it. Let me zoom in a touch over here. Here we go. The first thing, actually, I'm going to start by zooming out on this. So the first thing I see is a lot of text, and it also starts to wrap over into another page. I would generally advise it's got to be on one page, or it's got to fill up probably at least 2/3 of that second page. So you either want to space this stuff out to where you have the same content, but make it, get down to here on the page. Like you want it to fill up at least 2/3 of that second page, or you need to trim out a whole lot of stuff so that it all fits onto one page. That would be the first thing I would do here. All right, so let's zoom in. You're starting with employment history, and your technical skills are way down here at the bottom. Me personally, as a hiring manager, I like to see those technical skills at the very top. Like I see your contact information and then the skills. As a hiring manager, I want to know in a hurry, do you even have the skill? Do I even need to read this resume? I want to be able to see quickly, do you have the skills that I'm looking for my particular job post? So I would move this technical skill block up to the very, very top. Explaining what you do in Excel with pivot tables and things like that, that's fine. I hate this vertical bar as a separator. Just comma delimit it. It's actually interruptive to read from a mind psychology point of view, because we don't typically see that vertical bar in day-to-day life. We see commas and we see just white space separators. We don't see vertical bars separating things. And so it's very interruptive to our brain to go, what's this? Oh, it's a vertical bar. Let me keep reading. Wait, what's this? Oh, it's another vertical bar. Let me keep reading. And so it actually slows down our reading in an annoying way. And so I would get rid of that vertical bar. I would just comma delimit this. Tableau, Power BI, Python, SQL, Jupyter Notebook. These are fine. Say if you've used other libraries for data science, try to get them on here as well. If you use things like Panda, have you used PyNum? Is it PyNum or NumPy? What kinds of other libraries and tools have you done around the idea of data science? List those on here as well. I think that would be important. Education, because your education, it's in decision science, business analytics. It's kind of related to data science, I guess. I would say if this is really qualified for the kind of role to which you're applying, then you could maybe move that up higher on the page. Otherwise, I'm a big fan of just keep the education down at the bottom if they really care about where you went to school. If it's like a really big name brand school like MIT or Georgia Tech or something like that, you definitely want it up at the top, like Stanford and stuff like that, because those kinds of schools are highly coveted by companies. Most companies honestly don't care. They want to know that you finished school or that you have gone to school in some capacity, but where you've gone to school, it's not really that important. But yeah, we're jumping straight into employment history. Your dates don't really line up on that right margin. So the current kind of lines up about here in the 2018, you got a little bit of a gap here. So the first thing I would try to do is get all those dates on that right margin so that's pretty consistent over there. And then if you really need really long explanations of text, I would probably do a soft carriage return in here, a shift enter, to where this is going to move it down onto the next line to where you're not putting text underneath those dates. It'll allow those dates to have kind of a visual column, even though it's not actually a table column. It'll make it appear like a visual sort of column on the page, and it'll be a lot easier for people to kind of see and sort of pick things up. But this is a lot of text. I will tell you, as a hiring manager, I'm not reading all this. I'm just not going to read all this. I'm going to kind of skim through, okay, Power BI, ETL process with CSVs, did Power BI again. You're telling me over and over again, Power BI. Here you're mentioning Pandas and NumPy, but you don't put that down below. So again, you got to list this kind of stuff in your skills block. If you're okay answering questions about it on a resume or at an interview, then put it in that skills block. By listing it here and not putting it in a skills block tells me as the person reading this that you've kind of used it, but you're not comfortable answering questions about it. Maybe I could like softball you and like, sort of underhand give you some soft questions about like, hey, tell me about what you did in Pandas. How does it differ from this or that? Like, have you used Scikit? Do you know the difference between like Pandas and Scikit? Like, what would those things be? Just to kind of see like, what's your depth of knowledge in that thing, because you didn't list it as a skill. If you list it as a skill, then I'm like, oh, Pandas. Let me ask you these specific things about Pandas to try to find your limits of knowledge in using that tool. But you're listing Power BI like a ton of times on here, and it's looking very redundant, especially when you're mentioning it many times over. So I think you could probably reduce the amount of text on here just by simplifying sort of what you're saying and condensing this a little bit more. Mac and Swiss asks in chat, would it be worthwhile to bold some of the most standout parts of the bullet point? Maybe, but you also don't want to start littering this with bold either. But there may be tools on here that are like really standout tools to a particular company. Like if they use some really niche tool, like I know Tableau is not like a, highly specific skill. Very few people use Tableau or something like that, but this company's hiring for a Tableau and you have it. In that case, yes, you would put a bold on there. In this case, Tableau is a pretty universal tool when it comes to things like data science and things like that. So you wouldn't put a bold on there because it's sort of that expected tool chain, toolkit kind of thing that they would expect you to have. Collaborate with IT directors. GOV IT teams, is that like government? Or is that GOV, is that the name of the company? If it's the name of the company, that's fine. But how is that different from IT directors, IT teams? I would just say collaborate with IT, or collaborate with everyone in IT or something like that, and data owners. So you're giving me like a lot of people that you collaborated with. I think you could simplify that kind of statement just to where these bullet points aren't really, really long. So bullet points got their name from actual bullets, and they need to be fast and impactful. And so bullet points shouldn't be many, many lines long. For me, I like to try to keep a bullet point like 2/3, maybe at most 3/4 of the width of the page or whatever container they're in, but not be like many, many lines of text. When we read bullet points, we're generally only picking up the first couple of words, and our minds are subconsciously like blanking out the rest. And so again, it kind of lends to like where you want this to just to be a really strong action verb. Like I developed this to do this, and this was the impact that it had. And just that's really what a bullet point is. This is the thing that I did with a really strong action verb, and this was the impact that it had. A resume is basically a collection of facts of the impact that you can have at their company. This is kind of like when I read a resume, it's like, oh, you could do that here. Like you want to entice me into thinking that this is the value that you're going to introduce at my company if I were to hire you. And this is why I'm going to interview you. And so you want this to be short and compact as much as possible to where you're just really promoting that value. If you feel the need to explain a lot more of what's going on here, that's where you write a cover letter. A cover letter provides context to the facts of your resume. The cover letter is kind of like the creative writing version of your resume, where you can give me more background into like why you built what you did, why you care about the job at my company, why you think my company is the best company on earth, blah, blah, blah. That all goes in the cover letter. But it can also back up a lot of what you're talking about on the resume. But the resume just needs to be a concise list of facts of these are the skills I have, this is the value that I bring. These are the skills I have, this is the value that I've brought to another company and therefore will bring to your company if you hire me. That's really what a resume is. And so you don't need to go into like really long explanatory sentences where like I'm looking at this one specifically, like 4.5 lines of text for a single bullet point. I would, and multiple sentences. I would figure out, is each sentence worthy of being its own bullet point? If not, I would trim it out. And again, this is where the idea of building that really big resume and trimming it down to one page really makes an impact around how do we show that value in a very clear, easy to read, easy to find kind of way. I did a resume review last October, November, with a guy named Josh that I worked with at SendGrid. And Josh and I basically, we pulled up a resume and it was full of hardware. I built this circuitry. I worked on this sort of like, circuit panels and like all kinds of hardware and FPGAs and all this stuff and just tons and tons of stuff. But when I told people like, hey, send us your resume, I gave specific instructions like, give me a resume as though you're applying for a software developer job. Well, like way over, like it was a 2-column format and they had a really skinny right column, and like buried, 2/3 of the way down that right column was like, they had like one little bullet point on I've worked in Python. But other than that, it was like a 2-page resume of just hardware. And like over on the side, it's like, I've completed some project works in Python. It's like one tiny little bullet point. Your resume doesn't scream, I'm a software developer. These are the projects that I've built as a software developer. It's good to show the professional experience of being the hardware developer and that kind of stuff, but it's not showing me the value of why you're applying for my job. And so one thing to think about here with this kind of resume is like, you don't need to over explain this stuff, especially if the company already knows what a lot of this stuff is. You don't have to explain it. And so I would trim down the text quite a bit here. Master Firewall said, shorten it quite a bit. Got it. Down below, I was working both jobs at the same time just to get ahead of when you see that. Okay, I hadn't even looked at that yet. So this job was September 2018. This one ended in May 2018. So already, like to me, I'm like, there's a bit of a time gap in here. A little bit of a time gap is fine. If you have a gap on your resume, it's totally okay, as long as you have a story to tell about why there was a gap, if it even comes up. It's like, oh, what were you doing between June and September? You know what? I've been working in the tech industry a long time. I took some time off. I took a sabbatical. No one's going to think twice about that. They're like, all right, cool. It also takes a while to get a job. And so if there's a couple of months in between, it's not a big deal. Where it becomes a big deal is when there's a really big gap. Like, is there a gap of like a year and a half on the resume? Now it's like, okay, well, what were you doing in that year and a half? That's a long time. Like, how are you keeping your skills sharp and stuff like that? So far, I don't see anything overlapping on here. You went from March to March. Oh, so this is the one that overlapped here. Okay. So sales analyst. So I'd be curious. So creating sales dashboards and doing Tableau and things like that. So the fact that you were still working at the sales analyst job and working for all of these other jobs, well, at least these 2 jobs at the same time, that would be something that you would want to explain sooner than later. Because in today's realm, there's been a lot of buzz on LinkedIn over the past year or two, more so the last like year since the pandemic, of like, since everybody's working from home, does anybody really know what you do during the day? And could you pull off working 2 full-time jobs where you're really only working each job kind of like half? Or maybe you're actually working like 60, 70 hours a week, but you're splitting your time across 2 jobs and you're like double dipping and you're getting like double salaries and double benefits and all that stuff. It is a thing. And so companies may worry when they see this of like, if you're working remote, are you also going to work double jobs? So that might be something where you need to explain, like, what was the scenario here? Was the sales analyst like on the side? Was it part of the same company? Was there any kind of conflict of interest that you had to take into account here? And so that's not something that you would explain on a resume. You could explain on the cover letter, where you say like, you'll note on my resume that there was some overlap between a couple of jobs, and this was, I was doing some freelance consulting work on the side while I was working full time or something like that. Or you could just explain it in the interview if it comes up. They may not even catch it. Like at first glance, I didn't even catch it. I mean, eventually I might have looked at this and go, why is this 2017? This is 2018. Like, and then I would have caught like, oh, these were actually overlapping. Like you were working these at the same time. If they catch it, they catch it. If they don't catch it and they don't ask about it, then you don't need to explain anything. You don't need to volunteer it. But if they ask, you need to have a good story about it. So I would say prepare a story, practice that story, run it by other people. Like, does this sound okay, or does this sound sketch or suspicious? Like, you want to run that by people just to kind of get their take on, does this sound all right, as an explanation for why I was working these jobs. Because you were basically working this job while you were working these other 2 jobs. And so like being able to explain that. Now this one was fairly short. This job was only a few months long. And this one was like a little over a year. So yeah, I would probably just make sure that you have a good explanation for it. But otherwise, I don't see it as being a big deal. But yeah, you definitely want to trim this down to being 1 page. And I think you can do that by eliminating some of this text and only keeping the really relevant stuff that as you're applying for a job, like what is that company going to care about? Keep some of those bullet points and trim out the rest. What I do like is that your most recent job has a lot more bullet points than your older jobs. Like these jobs don't have nearly as many bullet points. This job, you had a lot more bullet points, but you were also there longer. And so to me, that looks okay. These jobs though, like I like that this one is only 2 bullet points because you were only there for 3 months. I could probably figure out a way of like, is that a way that you could just put a single bullet point on there instead of 2? You're only there for 3 months. But yeah, I think you want to make sure that you're not duplicating a lot of stuff. Like here, you're talking about VMI, VMI. Like you mentioned VMI in here 4 times in 6 bullet points. So like try not to be as redundant on this stuff. Also, when we're talking about VMI, I don't see any discussion about VMI here. You use VMI here a whole bunch, and it's not till we get down here that we actually see what VMI even means. So as you're building out the resume, if you're using an industry-specific term like that, define it as early as possible in the document so that later on when they're reading through, like, what was that VMI thing? Oh, it was up here at the top. Where here I'm like, okay, VMI, I have no idea what VMI is. Oh, here's this VMI thing. Here's this VMI thing. Oh, vendor management or vendor managed inventory. So like put that explanation the very first time you use it. And then after that, you can just use the acronym and you don't have to keep explaining it over and over. But yeah, I would definitely trim up some of this text. The other thing, you generally don't want a bullet point that wraps where you only have like 1 or 2 words on that next line. If that's the case, like bullet points also don't need to be grammatically correct sentences. You can say like executed manufacturing, vendor management inventory, and replenishment for key national accounts utilizing data alliance systems. I'm trying to think of how can we reduce the words here to where it's not a grammatically correct sentence, but still shows this is what I did and this is the impact that it had. So right now you're telling me a lot of what you did. I haven't yet seen a lot of quantified, like it had this impact. Like this application is run daily. Okay, but did it save somebody time? Like did this reduce somebody's workload by 5%? Like put that on the resume. Excel, capital E, like, you know, spot little things like that. But like, you want to be able to talk about like, this is the impact that it had. Because right now you're just saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And you're showing me like, this is how I exercised all these skills, but you're not really showing like a compelling value of the impact that you had on your team. So try to find ways of showing that impact. Like, you know, by building this report, it saved 3 hours a week of, you know, manual process time. By building this ETL, we were able to process like 1 million reports, you know, 30% faster than before. Like, you know, try to, if you know those numbers. If you don't have those numbers, then you can't quantify it. But if you have a way of going back and getting that kind of data, that looks really great on a resume. Like any kind of quantified information looks really strong on a resume. Delbird says in chat, remember HR managers are just reading for keywords. They see your resume first. Yep. And then they'll hand it off to like, you know, whichever sort of technical manager or hiring manager in that team would be screening you from there. And they're the ones who are going to know more of those technical terms where maybe the HR team don't know what VMI is, but they know that that's a keyword to watch out for. So they're just putting, you know, these keywords in, like find me someone with Tableau that has done VMI. Boom, your resume is going to show up and they're going to look over and go, yeah, I see those keywords on here. Let's give you a call. And they're going to talk to you about the role or whatever. And then they're going to hand you off to that technical manager at that point. That technical manager then is going to kind of screen through this a little bit more and look through it a little bit more for like consistency. And is like, does what you say actually make sense for how you use VMI and Tableau and things like that? But again, you know, bullet points don't need to be nearly this long. These are good bullet points. These 2 bullet points right here, like these are good length types of bullet points. But again, they don't have to be grammatically correct. They don't have to end with periods. So yeah, I think you can trim up a lot of that, get that down to 1 page easily. Cool. Overall, pretty good job on a resume. I think you can clean up a little bit.
Keep doing it. Keep it up. Keep it up, bro. You're the best.
Thanks for checking that out. I hope that you found it helpful. I always appreciate feedback, so please let me know what you think. I appreciate any subscriptions, so please tell your friends and colleagues about it as well. Check out the website techinterview.guide for more information about when I'm live streaming and all of my free content. Drop by a live stream anytime to ask questions or message me privately, whatever makes you most comfortable. See you next time.